There's no built-in verification to say, well, can this network actually reach these addresses? Filtering requires an extra step. You can do route filtering where you check to see if that provider, that AS, that autonomous system, actually has authority to advertise that space. There's lots and lots of providers that don't do that, especially providers not based in the US. When it comes to routing, the most specific route wins. So a lot of you have networks at home, probably have like 192.168 space or 172 space or 10 dot space, okay? /24 is a very common network size. That's 255 IP addresses that are available. All of these 4 addresses can be aggregated into this single address. So if I get 2 advertisements, and one is 192.168.0.0/22, but then I get another advertisement, say I want to hit the .2 network on this. I get an advertisement from someone else with just this .2/24, or it could be all of these, but they all have this /24. That is a longer match, so I'm going to prefer them. And this is how BGP hijacking works. Most specific route wins. So we have Facebook up here advertising to AS1, 192.168.0.0/22. We have Facebook down here, the attacker, advertising these 4 networks. These 4 networks make up everything that's in here. He advertises them to here. Where am I going to go to reach 192.168.2.0? Right? I'm going to go to Facebook. So now that attacker is receiving all the Facebook's traffic for that autonomous system. Here's an attack that happened in the real world. What's interesting is this combined 2 different types of attacks, PGP hijacking, and then as well as a DNS attack. So these hackers emptied Ethereum wallets for these customers. How it worked was they compromised the router in Chicago at the Equinix exchange. What they did is they injected more specific routes for AWS 53, which is Amazon's DNS service. Okay? So they advertised more specific routes from this router that they had compromised for AWS. So then when customers are saying, how do I get to my Ethereum wallet, they do a DNS resolution. It comes back with the address of actually the DNS resolver is this fake address. What they then do is serve up a malicious website that's actually in Russia. So they're not actually serving up the legitimate My Ethereum wallet address. They are serving up a cloned site that looks like their site, but it's actually going to a server in Russia. The thing is, they had an invalid certificate, but people just, a lot of times just click, yeah, whatever, okay. It says it up there where I'm at, so this is where I'm at, okay. So just click it, and they went and logged in, and they lost. What's interesting is they didn't lose a whole lot of money. All in all, only $13,000 worth of Ethereum was stolen. But what's interesting is when you looked at the wallet for these attackers, they had over $17 million of Ethereum in their wallets there. So they definitely had probably done this before. This is just something that got caught. One of the reasons this got a little more attention is because it happened in the US. You see this type of hijacking happen more in Eastern Europe and Asia. But what I got to say is, and you're going to see this here, is the internet itself is just made up of duct tape and bubble gum. These protocols that it's built, the 2 main protocols the internet's built on, BGP and DNS, are inherently insecure, horribly insecure. Dan Kaminsky did a talk 10, 12 years ago on how bad DNS is. So, as you'll see, it's we try to, we engineer it as best we can, but the protocols themselves are inherently insecure. They're very trusting. So, how do you defend against BGP hijacking? Route filtering is the primary way that you do that. So when you peer with another provider, you check to see if the addresses they are sending you, they can actually send you. So there's routing registries that you can check against. Device hardening, that attack that we just saw was the result initially of a router being compromised at an internet exchange in Chicago. If that box had been hardened, it wouldn't have been able to get there. The other thing is, too often, the management plane for routers is also in the data plane. What that means is I can sit on my computer, I can pull up a console, and I can SSH to a router. You shouldn't be able to do that. What needs to happen in that case is your management needs to be a complete out-of-band network that's built separate from your in-band data network. So separate your management from your data plane there. RPKI, which takes advantage of PKI infrastructure to, what they'll do is it'll take an AS number and an IP, and you can hash those, and they can be quickly checked against a registry to see. So when I'm talking about the route filtering can be done very simply, or you can actually make it more complicated but also more dynamic by using RPKI. BGP-sec is similar. I'm not going to get into too many details, but it also allows you to, it also utilizes KPI infrastructure, but it's also very slow. Every route advertisement you get has to be calculated, and it can only do one route advertisement at a time. Typically, when you do a route advertisement, you can send hundreds of networks upstream, where in this case, you got to do one at a time. Manners, mutually agreed norms for routing security. This is a group that's got together and kind of written out standards, trying to get people to follow route filtering and verification and stuff like that. Thing is, not a lot of people have it. So not a lot of people have manners in that regard. Something probably most of you are familiar with, distributed denial of service. I see these attacks on a legit daily basis. So VisionNet, I should have told you at the beginning, VisionNet is a company that was formed by most of the telephone companies in Montana. So like Blackfoot is shareholders of ours, Triangle Telephone, Three Rivers, Northern Telephone, Southern, ACT Range over in eastern Montana. Those are our shareholders, and Niemont up in northeast Montana. So they all got together and said, hey, we want to form, you have customers and we have customers that want to talk to each other, or I have a customer that has a site in your territory, but they also have a site in my territory. So let's get together so they can, and they made us an exchange between them. We also did video conferencing. This was back in the 90s when video conferencing was a thing. Was a service that people didn't just use Skype for or something like that. So we're strictly a commercial service provider. We have no residential customers, but some customers of ours are like Three Rivers Telephone in Fairfield, Great Falls area. Their customers are our customers via transitive property there. So I see attacks all the time going after our what we call our shareholders' customers. Usually, majority of the time, it's somebody got ticked off on Xbox Live or something like that, and they go and pay a couple bucks and DDoS somebody for a couple minutes to knock them offline, that sort of thing. Other cases I've seen are, there was a student at a school that wanted to do a test against their school system, so he, I don't know if it was LOIC, the low orbit ion cannon or something like that, but they got it, so they pointed at the school and they DDoSed the school and took them offline for a while. Most of the attacks that we see at VisionNet are 1 to 2 gigabits per second, which if you're the end customer, like say you're someone at home or a school district, that's a ton of traffic. For us, it's just it's a blip. It's not a big deal. But us being, we provide the internet for all these customers, we're the ones that are in charge of filtering it or trying to block that type of traffic. The largest DDoS attack in terms of volume was 1.3 terabits per second against GitHub back in February of 2018. Luckily for them, they're a Cloudflare customer. What's interesting is this was a memcached DDoS attack. Most DDoS attacks are botnets, just little tiny devices that haven't been secured. IoT devices like cameras and routers and stuff like that that haven't been locked down, or just the vendor doesn't give a darn. So, but this one was a memcache issue. So if you get a chance, Google that up. But so the Mirai botnet was an IoT botnet, and it was lots and lots of CPE devices like routers and quite a few cameras. I think that there was 60 some. They just took a list of default usernames and passwords, scanned the internet for indicators of these devices, and then just shoved these in there. And then when they authenticated, they took it over. And it was huge. Let me check the numbers here on that one. It was, I don't got the complete numbers, but yeah, 60 common factory default usernames or passwords. There's lots of different kinds of DDoS attacks. Looking at the OSI layer, OSI model, layer 7 attacks. The common one's HTTP flood, where you're just constantly requesting a website, getting multiple devices to request a website to take it offline. Protocol attacks like a SYN flood, so you're leaving half-open sessions, you're doing SYNs to these servers, and then eventually, usually what fails actually is the WAF or the firewall that's in front of them before the server itself even fails. It has all of these open connections, and then it just runs out of memory and falls on its face. The most common that I see are the volumetric attacks that I was just discussing. So when I first started at VisionNet, we had a gigantic attack that knocked our DNS offline, as well as filled up all of our pipes. Our old network, this was 5 years ago, had, I think, 30 gigs of capacity, and it knocked it offline. How that happened was all of these devices that our shareholders had put out, not all of them, but a large majority of these devices our shareholders put out, modems and customer prem routers, were sent with port 53 available on the WAN interface. Can someone tell me why that would be a problem? Why?
Port 53 on the WAN interface. Well, UDP 53, you can reflection tag.
Exactly. So port 53 is DNS. So what that means is these became what's called they were open resolvers. So you could query these routers. You could send a DNS query. So how amplification attack works is I can send a tiny little packet saying, hey, what's the name or what's the IP for this name? But the response can be magnitudes larger than what I send. So what happened in this case is somebody ticked someone else off. How the DNS amplification attack works is you spoof the sender address and you send requests out to all of these devices for a DNS request, and then they respond back and just flood you. Problem is, guess where all of those devices were recursing their DNS to? So those end devices, guess where when they said, oh, well, I don't have that here because I'm just a tiny little router, I don't know all these things, let me check my DNS. Guess whose DNS it was going to? It's going to VisionNet's DNS, right? It cratered the firewall that was in front of it. It was probably smoking. So VisionNet's based in Great Falls. Our DNS at the time was in Great Falls and Billings, so I was here, but I think I saw some smoke rising up there in the north central. It was bad. How do we mitigate this? Well, we had sent out a hardening guide to all of our shareholders on what they needed to do to harden their systems. It just gets busy and people forget. Also, the manufacturers have some culpability in this. Why they would send out devices that have port 53 open on the WAN side is beyond me. At the end of the day, we have automated control of lots of these modems, so we were able to patch them ourselves. There's over 7,000 endpoints, modems, and routers that we patched. So some defenses against distributed denial of services. The number one is black hole routing. What that entails is basically you take the victim IP offline, and usually the attacks stop. It's basically you're cutting off the infected limb to save the rest of the body. So you're saying, sorry customer, but we're going to black hole you. Granted, they probably don't have any connectivity. They're probably, for the most part, feel that they're down anyways, but we'll literally go and put in a null route on the edge of the network that anything destined for them just goes to the bit bucket. We just punt it. Some great defenses for this are Arbor networks and A10 networks at scale for service provider side. There are some solutions that are smaller for the enterprise side, but on the service provider side, we're looking at boxes that can handle hundreds of gigs at a time. And Arbor and A10 are great for that. They utilize, for the most part, NetFlow to recognize malicious traffic, both in terms of volume, but also those starvation attacks are something that you might not see in terms of it's not a lot of volume, but it is a denial of service attack. So Arbor and A10 can recognize that traffic and also black hole that customer. What you can also do is traffic scrubbing. The problem with traffic scrubbing is it's about 10 times as expensive as deploying a black hole solution. How Arbor and A10 works is they're actually speaking BGP to your routers. And when they recognize an attack, they will send a route, a very specific, so for IPv4/32, they'll send a specific route for that IP to those routers saying, come to me, or they'll say, the next hop for this is null 0 on a Cisco box, which will then just black hole that traffic. If you're scrubbing, what you can do is actually scrub out the bad traffic and deliver the good. But that's more of a premium service if it gets offered because it's quite expensive. Also utilizes NetFlow. Rate limiting, this is good for especially like the upper layer attacks. Rate limiting just what can get to a server. Just you can do it based off your router ports or switch ports. What's actually able to get sent to your server, you can rate limit that. Web application firewalls are the best thing against the layer 7 application attacks, so like Nginx, big IP F5s, stuff like that. Anycast. This is a solution that we deployed at VisionNet. So how Anycast works is it's a single IP, but there's multiple servers that are sitting behind it. So anyone here use Google DNS 8.8.8.8? Well, do you think that's just one server sitting in Palo Alto? No. What that is that's what's called an Anycast server. And what happens is it gets routed, your traffic gets routed to the closest one. That's how Anycast works. It's multiple servers behind one IP address, and when you go to it, it just gets routed to the nearest one. It can get kind of confusing because you're like, well, how can multiple servers have the same IP address? But it works. So in the case of when our DNS got taken offline because of that denial of service attack, if we had Anycast in place at the time, now I think we've got 5 or 6 servers spread around our network, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad. This is also on a brand. After this and some other issues, we just greenfield and built an entire brand new network as well, which I'm happy to nerd out on later if you want to talk about it. All right, here comes the fun stuff. If I can keep you awake. So Huawei. Anybody see this stuff lately about Huawei and ZTE, the issues that we've been having with them? But what's interesting is specifically to the state issues that we're having with, not necessarily with Huawei, but that the federal government has with Huawei. So Huawei is huge in rural America for building out cellular networks because it's cheap. And when you're in northeast Montana and you have one customer per 10 square miles, you don't want to go drop $500,000 on a switch or a cell tower equipment from Cisco or from Ericsson. You're going to go get something from Huawei. Problem is, the U.S. government has issues with Huawei, as well as ZTE, which is sort of a sister company of Huawei. In Montana, there's multiple service providers that are shareholders of mine, and I don't speak for any of our shareholders. If I say anything dumb, I don't speak for VisionNet, that utilize Huawei equipment. So this has been well documented. Anybody know what this fenced-in area is right here? Missile silos, exactly. Anybody want to know what this is right here? That's a cell tower running Huawei. So the federal government has issues with this.
Ben, are you concerned about spyware foreign governments?
I'm not. I'm not, and I'll tell you why. Oh. So this is from March of this year. The one before was, did I get a date on that? No, I didn't. This was around the same time. Does anyone think that this is a new development, like it's more of the Trump trade wars with China and some protectionism, stuff like that, that we're like, no, no Huawei? Anybody think that it's a new development? You're right, Andy. This article is from October 13th, 2011, where it talks about banning Huawei from the public safety and LTE networks, Huawei and ZTE. I got a quick story for you here. So back when I was at VisionNet at Bresnan, this is about 10 years ago, we were evaluating new switches for our service provider network. And when I say switches, I don't mean like a tiny little Linksys or a 1RU Cisco box. I'm talking switches that are half a rack or even a full rack. Hundreds and hundreds of ports on these switches. And we're going through the typical vendors like Juniper, Extreme, Cisco, and the like. We get a call from this company called ZTE, and we're like, ZTE? We've never even heard of you. We're like, okay. So we start Googling around like, oh, they're with Huawei, or they're associated with Huawei. What we knew about Huawei is they basically just steal everything from Cisco. Like iOS, the iOS before Apple came around, the actual iOS, Internet Operating System from Cisco, they stole it to the point where they wouldn't even bother to flush out things that specifically said Cisco when you would do printouts in the config. You could get a Huawei box and run like a show version and say Cisco blah, blah, blah. This was, like I said, about 10, 12 years ago. I mean, they just didn't care. They're like, they'd build their own hardware that it was pretty much just stolen from the Cisco specs and then take the Cisco iOS software and put it on there and then sell it back to us. We're like, oh, well, let's give them a shot because they were cheap. And for the performance specs, it was insane. We're like, well, let's bring them in. So a couple of weeks after they contact us, crate shows up with a switch on it that's probably about this high on me. And we rack it up and we start working on it. And we're just doing our standard proof of concept, putting the switch through its paces. And I'm working closely with my director, and then all of a sudden, there's somebody at the front. This is back in Billings, at the front of the Bresnan building. And they come inside, and they're like, well, we need to speak with Joe. And he was my director at the time. And he's like, okay. So he goes and sits down with them. This is a 3-letter agency. I won't say who it was, maybe because I don't actually remember, but you could probably take a guess of which 3-letter agency it was. So all I know is that they sat down with Joe for quite a while, and he's a rough and tough guy. He was a pig farmer and a network engineer. He's a pretty cool dude, and he's a former Marine. So there's no BS about him. But what I do know is he came out of that meeting and came up to me and said, box up that ZTE box and send it back now. I was like, all right. So that's what I did. I went with another person. We boxed that thing up and we sent it back to ZTE and we cut all ties with them. And this was in 2009 or 10. So this has been going on for quite a while that the government's been worried about this sort of thing. Circling back around to your question, in terms of spying, I am not worried about spying because it would be extremely difficult for them to be able to spy in band. So for them to pull traffic and then shunt it off within the same channel that all the other traffic's going through. It would be extremely difficult in terms of how they would communicate to the box and how they would be able to peel that traffic off, the specific traffic, and get it sent to themselves. So that's why I'm not worried about it. It's kind of different from a network tap or a span port where you're like, hey, I'm going to copy this, all the traffic for this IP or all the traffic coming out of this switch port, I want a copy of it sent over here. If you're working on a cell tower and all that traffic's coming in and out, basically one or two directions, for them to be able to say, okay, I want traffic from this to send whatever crafted packet or whatever to the box and give it instructions to copy that traffic to them, I just don't logically see how they could do it.
Could they pull out things like usernames and passwords and just send that little bit of traffic back?
that would be a more logical thing that wouldn't be caught so much on, good, less chance of it being caught. What I think, in my opinion, the biggest risk is a kill switch type of scenario where they know how to craft a specific packet where if it goes through that box, it shuts it down. We've seen that introduced accidentally in Cisco routers and Juniper routers and stuff where they get a malformed, accidentally, a certain packet and all of a sudden it loses its mind. And that's where I think the biggest issue would be. I don't work for NSA and stuff. I don't have all the intelligence background that the federal government's so worried about, but logically, the kill switch would be the most likely attack. Because if you're running any decent network security monitoring and they somehow figure out how they're going to get traffic specified and then sent to them and you're not catching it, it's logistically that would be pretty crazy, I think. Not impossible. I think the scenario you brought up about maybe just, a username or password, that sort of thing might be a more logical solution. Thing is, why do something that's so difficult there when they can just send a spearfish to some net admin and then get on the box and then copy all the text messages that they want, right?
Are you concerned with any like just bad coding practices? Not necessarily that maybe they're trying to get into us, but they're just, since they're kind of pirating, maybe reverse engineering stuff so badly that other people can get into stuff.
Repeat the question.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. So the question is, am I worried about coding practices where they're writing code just basically so bad that people will be able to get in? Or you think more along the lines of accidentally a backdoor or a backdoor on purpose? Or
Yes.
okay. Yeah.
I just heard, I have heard like that if you look at the code on the two, like say a Cisco versus ZT, a Huawei, just it's the security prowess of ZT Huawei just is in comparison.
You're exactly right. I don't think they have a secure development life cycle. I don't think there's probably not a translation for that in Chinese, because it is, from everything I've read, it's not there. I don't have the skill set to sit there and tell you X, Y, Z that this is bad, but talking to people that do know and have looked at that, yeah, you're exactly right. And there's federal government that will sit there and take code and debug it and decompile the code and go through it and see and look for that sort of stuff. Lots of people actually do that, but the government's ones that are really concerned about it. So, good question. Thanks, Andy. This kind of goes along the same line. So SS7 attacks, so signaling system 7. So we talked about Captain Crunch and how the reason his attack worked was because it was in band, meaning that the signaling traffic was going with your media, your voice traffic was the same. So one of the things that was developed was SS7 signaling, which is out of band, so that your call setup and teardown and all that stuff is signaled outside of the same channel that your voice traffic is going through, what's called your bearer traffic. SS7 attacks and exploitations, they're used primarily to spy, track, and locate, and then sometimes manipulate data. SS7 can get very, very complicated, but we're going to focus on is the interconnect between carriers. That's the main function that SS7 provides, is handing off calls between carriers. So like from Verizon to AT&T, or from CenturyLink, from a POTS standard line to a cell phone carrier or something like that. SS7 is the signaling that's helping you do this. The HLR, this is subscriber traffic in terms of like your package, in terms of like your data and what you subscribe to. More interestingly, VLR is your location data based off of the closest cell tower that you're pinging off of, which in more densely populated areas where you have lots of femtocells or picocells can actually get very, very specific. And now with the E911, they have to actually be able to provide legit coordinates. So there's ways that you can not just figure out what cell tower they're going off of, but you can get their coordinates, their GPS coordinates, if their GPS is enabled. After years of warnings, mobile network hackers exploit SS7 to drain bank accounts. How do you think this would happen? Someone might have posted an article about this recently on their LinkedIn. So it's like, the same reason you would SIM swap is the same reason you do this SS7 attack. Intercepting your 2FA, or technically your two-step verification tokens for your bank or some other login. So you can get those text messages sent to you. So if you're trying to log into someone's stuff, you're like, oh, they got two-factor turned on. Well, I know their phone number, and now I'm going to get on the SS7 network, and I'm going to be able to route their SMS traffic. I mean, I'm very simplifying it. Route their SMS traffic to me, and now I can get that 2FA token and put that in.
Is it mainly the U.S. providers that enable that middling of the SS7 for redirecting into SS7 traffic, or is it the European?
Actually, it's the European is the worst. It's just there's so many more carriers and so many more jurisdictions and stuff like that that it's just logically it's much more difficult. And I'll talk about other reasons why they haven't done it. So they're slow to lock it down because it can impede legitimate traffic. And the question from Tom was, who's worse about SS7, the U.S. or Europe and Asia? The answer is pretty much Europe and Asia. It takes a lot of time to sit here and lock down SS7. The majority of traffic, 95+% of that traffic is legitimate. Actually, probably even greater than that is legitimate traffic. So you're putting in a ton of man hours to go and lock down for a couple one-off cases. So a lot of providers aren't locking down their SS7 because it doesn't impact them, right? As I've discussed, telecom is usually not the target. It's our customers that are the target. And for some, now, we as VisionNet, we care, so we help. So we have SS7 signaling, we have it locked down, but there's other providers that don't. So we're just better. How the heck do they get in there? How do they get to the point where they can manipulate SS7? As with a lot of attacks, it's a malicious insider or bribing them. Kind of the same thing with SIM swapping, bribing someone to swap a phone number on a SIM at Verizon or AT&T. Hacking into the provider network itself, as we've seen in other attacks. Just hacking in and then getting on the SS7 system and being able to intercept that traffic. Also, femtocells are actually able to signal SS7. There's a lot of femtocells around, and a lot of the time, they're not nearly as locked down as your standard cellular tower. Also, they peer. They flat out, someone calls up and says, hey, I'm a phone provider, and I want to peer SS7 with you. And someone goes, oh, okay. And they'll literally just peer with them with SS7 signaling. Normally, that is a state actor. There's lots of state actors, including the U.S. government, that does this sort of thing. But there's probably some pretty good social engineers out there that would be able to do it too. So how do you defend against this? Utilizing the critical security controls. I pulled this from SANS. It's kind of, a lot of it is duh, but some of it's pretty interesting. Boundary defenses is a big thing. So filtering that SS7 traffic, utilizing a SS7 aware firewall so that you know that you're sending, I should say receiving, legitimate SS7 traffic. Maintenance and monitoring logs, auditing those, logging through them. Secure network engineering, so standard practice of segmenting your network so that maybe if someone does hack into, someone spearfishes your enterprise network, making it so it's very difficult for them to get into your SS7 signaling network. Penetration testing is a big one, red team exercises. Hire a company and see if they can get into your SS7 network one way or the other. Continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation. Instant response, and then secure configurations is a big one. You'll find SS7 devices that aren't locked down, and if you can log into them, then you can perform all of these actions. And there's some interesting ways that you can find those that I'll mention here. Overarching telecom defense. It comes down to the basics a lot of the time, but just because they're the basics doesn't mean they're easy. So stuff like inventorying all your systems, both hardware and software. It's basic, but is it easy? Is it easy to go inventory thousands of machines and everything that's running on all those machines? No, that's why a lot of people don't do it. Awareness training, patching, vol management, like I said, a lot of the basics, but they're not necessarily easy. Telecom specifically, as I had said earlier, is I get to defend, actually it's 2+ networks. The enterprise network, our telecom network, well, our telecom network is made up of a couple other networks, let's put it that way. But separating your management network from your data, let me show you what happens when you don't do that. Well, it's kind of hard to read, but good old Shodan is great at telling you where you've messed up. So I just did a simple search going back in the day for Bresnan, and what does this say here? I'll have to look here because I can't even read it. It's a little blurry on this. This system is restricted solely to Bresnan Communications authorized users for legitimate business purposes only. Only the actual or attempted unauthorized access is forbidden and is logged. You should not be able to see that at all, okay? Now, there's a case where this might just be a customer prem equipment where there's all you have is in-band. But if this was like a core router and you're able to pull up SSH prompt or, God forbid, a telnet prompt, that's bad news. So as I said, we at VisionNet, we built an entire out-of-band network that's completely separated and segregated via firewalls from our in-band network. And actually, our in-band network is also, you can't find it on Shodan because we don't advertise it. We have no need to advertise it because the traffic, once it hits the edge of our network, we know where it needs to go. But people outside our network don't need to know where that traffic is going. So like if you try to do a trace route through our network, you're going to get stars a couple times, and then all of a sudden it's going to someone else. You're going to come through CenturyLink, get stars, and pop out AT&T, and you're going to wonder where the hell did I just go? So that's one of our defenses. Is you don't even though our management is totally separated, we don't even allow you to. You can't even ping any of our interfaces or anything like that on our service provider network. So.
Is that becoming more common?
If you hire me, it is. Unfortunately, no, it's not. The question was is it becoming more common? And no, it's not.
Do you also look at source IP address on egress traffic to make sure that the IP makes sense for your network?
So what we do is we do it on the edge, not coming in like from our providers, but from our customers. So there's two different things there. One's what's called BCP 38, which has that as part of the standard. And then I'm completely blanking on the RPF checks, reverse path forwarding checks, to say I'm getting traffic from this IP, but am I expecting that source IP on this port? And if it's not, then we punt it. So
Because that's what everybody needs.
I shouldn't say
in order
punt,
to
drop it.
solve DDoS, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. If everybody did it, right? If everybody did it, we'd be doing great. So when it comes to telecom defense, device hardening is a huge one. Lots of vendors put out guides like Cisco and Juniper and stuff. Team Simru is really good as well at hardening guides for all different types of devices. NSA used to put out good ones for like Windows and Linux and stuff. I don't know if they're as up to date anymore. I think they stopped some of them actually. There's a great tool called CCAT, which is the Cisco Config Analysis tool to audit configs. It's actually just a Python 3 script that references the standards in the Cisco hardening guide. It'll take your config, you run it through this Python script, and then it spits out what is or isn't turned on that you need to have turned off. It makes stuff really easy. Problem is, it's not on iOS XR right now, so I guess if I get a bug in my butt and I really want to test my Python 3 skills, maybe I'll do it, but we'll see about that. This is actually what that script looks like when it comes out. So SSH version and checks against that. Service identified web server is HTTP management enabled on any interfaces, stuff like that. And it tells you yes, no, disabled, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, all you got to remember when it comes to the internet is it's all duct tape and bubble gum. Thanks for your time.
Very good.
about the SS7 2FA attack.
Yeah.
Did you read the article in Cribs recently about the guys who were stealing a bunch of credentials, and they just push it out to a whole bunch of different bank websites. A lot of those people have 2FA enabled, and they say, well, shucks, that doesn't work. So what they figured out they could do is they could push all those credentials to the banking website and make it appear like it was coming from QuickBooks. So you have that money manager at home, you say, oh, I don't want to manually enter all those checks I wrote. So you have it configured so QuickBooks can go to your bank account and pull all those entries, but it doesn't require 2FA to do that. So these guys figured out that was a way that they could bypass the old 2FA and access people's accounts.
Wow.
So that was pretty slick.
That.
So we are going to move on to phase 2 across the street. Paradise Falls, let's go have a drink. We also have some funds left over from the last time we met, so we've got a little kitty to start the first pitcher.
Can we do some announcements?
Yes, announcements.
I wanted to announce LMG is hiring. We're looking for an incident responder and threat hunter. So if you know anyone who has strong IT skills, that's what we're looking for. Have them shoot an email to jobs@lmgsecurity.com. So spread the word.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions?
I also wanted to thank Tom for setting up our live streaming. This is our
Thanks,
first
Tom.
time ever, and we had some folks tuning in, at least from LMG. So
Yeah, so next time, let's say we have a meeting and you can't make it, but you want to, if we do this live streaming again, we should have means by which you can go someplace and click on a link to find us. And we do have a URL, MSOInfosec.com. It's kind of basic, but if you are a coder and want to develop our website, that'd be cool.
anybody? Community service?
Wix.
All right, we're gonna cover this.
Get you something simple if you want. It won't be pretty, but I can get you with some.
Yeah.
Let's have a drink and talk about it. Yeah, that'd be cool. So then, if you're not here, you just go to MSOInfosec and you can live stream the next gathering. So that'd be cool. We're getting high tech around here. That'd be cool. Well, thank you guys for coming. This has been great. Appreciate it, and I'll see you across the street.
I wanted to be in the front anyways, so that worked out being good.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. You always put the tall guy in the front. How you been, man?
Not bad, good seeing you.
Yeah, you too.
I was like, well,
Thanks,
Ben's
Tom.
gonna be
Appreciate
there.
it.
Hey, anytime. So the biggest problem I had is like, apparently, if had I refreshed this page, there was a big like go live button that needed. There's a big go live button on the side that was not clicked.
Also, it didn't stream?